Napawi Kawit, Shikwakian Toronto, Anishik. So I started off by speaking a little bit in the Lenape language, saying I'm glad to see you all. My name is Vanessa. I'm a Lenape and Potawatomi woman. My family is from El Napawi Kawit, which is the Lenape name for a reserve in southwestern Ontario. And I live in Toronto, and thank you, Anishik. So I'm very excited to be continuing this series of talks today with Dyani White Hawk, who's here with us. Give you a wave. I will start by just giving a quick thank you to our institutional partners, the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, as well as the Jackman Humanities Institute at the University of Toronto. And now that we've thanked our institutional partners, we also want to thank the land that gathered on here today and our Indigenous hosts. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be here with you all and to get to speak with Dyani. So I'm going to just introduce Dyani to you by reading a little bit. So Dyani White Hawk is a Sinchangu Lakota, is a visual artist and independent curator based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. White Hawk earned an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, 2011, and a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 2008. She served as gallery director and the curator for All My Relations Gallery in Minneapolis from 2011 to 2015. So White Hawk has many accolades and accomplishments, including the 2019 United States Artist Fellowship in the Visual Arts, 2019 Eiteljorg Fellowship in Contemporary Art, 2019 Jerome Hill Arts Fellowship, and the list goes on. So I'm gonna pause there and just get to our conversation.
Thank you for the introduction, Vanessa, and for having me. My name is Dyani White Hawk. I'm Sichangu Lakota. Haamatakiapi, Wambli Wiaka Washdewi, Machiapi, Washichumie, Dyani White Hawk Polk. I am in Minneapolis right now, so in Minnesota. I'm on Dakota homelands, and today Minnesota is home to 4 Dakota tribes and 7 Ojibwe tribes, and Ho-Chunk folks have a long history too here as well, and others as well. But and then I live in Shakopee, Minnesota, and have my studio based in Minneapolis. And I've done quite a bit of curatorial work, but I've been doing my artistic practice full-time for over 5 years now. So I do some curatorial stuff here and there, but mostly making work.
Great. And I really wanted to talk to you today because I've been over this series of talks, really it's part of my own learning and journey about quill work. I didn't grow up around a lot of quill work. When I saw it, it was mostly in museums, and I saw mostly beadwork in my community. And it was a little bit later, and actually it was the artist Cheryl Rondell who suggested that I start to look at and learn about quill work to be able to control and dye my own colors. And yeah, it's been quite a long process for me to finding people who could share their skills, and taking that time to put into learning about quill work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been starting by asking artists just about how they learned about quill work and what it maybe was like in your community when you were younger, or how much quill work is being made today.
So my introduction to quill work and life story with quill work is also what's the right descriptor? I don't know, not what it would have been in the past pre-colonization days, you know. So my mom was adopted off the reservation when she was 18 months old, and was and here it's the adoption era, so she was a part of that, and relocated from Rosebud to Wisconsin. And so our family story is one of a lot of back and forth, you know. So she was reconnected with our family, and we have been since reconnected with our family. But I didn't grow up on a reservation. I grew up in Wisconsin instead of in South Dakota. And then I didn't, I was 11 years old when my mom was reunited with our family. And so even my own cultural learning, like we had the life experiences where the label was there, you know. As I was young, I knew I was Indian, but I didn't have, in those really super young years, I didn't have a lot of content to partner with that knowledge or that identifier, you know. And then so I, was around powwows and powwow culture, and in Wisconsin a lot, and then back and forth to South Dakota, you know, as many times as we could fit in a year, especially in my younger teen years and on. So I was definitely exposed to beadwork first, because that, you know, I mean, for the fairly obvious historical reasons, I guess they're not super obvious, but for historical reasons, you know, beads have really taken place of, for, you know, a number of reasons that I'm happy to get into later. But you know, so beadwork was the most prevalent. Beadwork was the first thing I learned. I learned to bead before I learned to paint. And I think I was around, I don't know, I was a young teen. I can't remember exactly what year it was. And so I was definitely, you know, it was interesting when you posed that question earlier, when were you first exposed to it? I don't know. You know, I mean, we were going home to, you know, our annual powwow every year. And, you know, I definitely was around quill work, because there's still, you know, a fairly thriving practice of quill work in Rosebud. And on the plains, but it's definitely nowhere near as prevalent as beadwork, you know. And then, but I didn't really start actively and critically thinking about it until I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, which I was there from 2005 to 2008. And then that's when I started learning it too. So here I am, a Lakota woman, and I learned quill work from a Choctaw man while I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So my, you know, my journey into quill work is not what, I didn't learn it from my aunties, I didn't learn it from my grandma, and I didn't even learn it from another Lakota woman. But it's been a fruitful and wonderful journey nonetheless, but it's something that's, really reflective of the effects of colonization on all our communities,
Absolutely. Yeah, I learned from a Cree woman living on Nipissing First Nation, just an Anishinaabe First Nation north of the city. So yeah, I think a similar, some shared commonalities in that yeah, I had to do a little bit of looking to find to find it and find somebody, and but it's been, at least for me, wonderful to be able to engage with the material of the quills and to get to feel like I'm connecting with the land in a different way, connecting with these animals in a different way. And for me, I think it really brings in a sense of spontaneity, or I guess spontaneity to the work, in terms of thinking through like the different shapes, like the different lengths and different diameters of the quill, and just having something that comes from an animal, right? That's never it's always changing, right? Each one has a little slight difference. So I feel like that has really made has really influenced my work.
Right on.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just give credit to the Choctaw man. He has a name. His name's Jerry Ingram. He's a fantastic quill worker and bead worker and painter and artist at large. He's amazing, and I'm really grateful for his, what he lent to us. And he was teaching traditional arts classes at IAI when I was there.
Did Jerry teach you how to harvest the quills?
No, that came later. He just, he brought in a stash of quills, and we had, because we were at college and I still get geeked out about this, getting college credit to learn quill work and beadwork and all of the, we were doing parfleche work and all of that. And we had supplies, you know what I mean? Because like the school had supplies on hand for that class. So we started with the actual application. We didn't start from harvesting. So yeah, all of that came later.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Jean Marshall on Wednesday, and she was really emphasizing the process of gathering all her materials. She uses quills and is applying them on home tan hide. So she really is very invested in the materials and that process.
Yeah, beginning to the end, which I think is extremely important to know and understand. And there's so few people that really have the breadth of that knowledge now, from beginning to end, from hunting to tanning and all of the knowledge that goes into that, and then harvesting quills and dyeing and sorting, and it's learning all of that in the way that I did. And I shouldn't say learning all of that, learning what I have been able to up until now. I have just such wildly tremendous respect for our ancestors and the amount of knowledge and scientific understanding and relationship understanding between human and non-human life, plant and animal, and all. It's amazing. It's a tremendous wealth of knowledge, and it's just really impressive. So looking at historical objects, I'm always just blown away, because I have, somewhat, even if I don't know every aspect of it, I have an understanding of what it takes to get there, you know, or at least a base level understanding of that. So it's a beautiful thing. So I would have liked to, I think you recorded these and I had to go back and watch that talk with her.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I think really exciting and important is the way that you incorporate quill work into your painting, both the physical quills
Mm-hmm.
and representing quill work through paint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I was interested in how you came to both those practices and that bringing together of your painting and quill work.
So I definitely consider my studio practice to be based predominantly in painting. So it's kind of the foundation of my studio practice, but my studio practice is just one part of my artistic practice at large. You know, I'm a jingle dress dancer. My kids dance, and like I had mentioned before, you know, learned how to bead from my mom's friends in Madison before I learned how to paint. And so, you know, there's a whole side of my practice that's works that are made just for cultural use, you know, just for, you know, powwow or ceremony or family use. And that part of my practice, even though it's not in museums and on gallery walls, is just as important to me as the other part of my practice that everybody gets to you know, see should they want to. And so, you know, I have my practice that like takes place on my dining room table and at home, and then I have my practice that takes place in my studio, and they have long informed one another, and guided and shaped one another, just because, you know, I mean, they may happen in separate spaces, but they're not separate in my life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to 2 different tribal colleges. So I started at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas, and I got my associates there, and then transferred to II in Santa Fe and got my bachelor's there. And so I spent 8 years, not the whole time in school, but 8 years within the tribal college communities. And then before I went back to like mainstream academia in graduate school in Madison. But when I was I you know, I was like, my primary focus was painting, but I was taking these traditional arts courses as well. And my BFA exhibition consisted of large scale abstract paintings and cases of the beadwork, quill work, and parfleche work that I had been making in my traditional arts classes. And they were all, you know, in the exhibit together. And I didn't think about it then, but I really ended up thinking about it later. It was that conglomeration of works all in one exhibition was a non-conversation when I was at II. It just wasn't a topic. I didn't have to justify for anybody why those things all existed together in a single exhibition. It was just my graduate thesis work, you know, and some of it looked like this and some of it looked like this, and you know, it just was. And then when I got to Madison, you know, Madison is a you know, Big Ten university. There's over 40,000 undergraduates alone, and that doesn't even count the graduate and PhD students. And it's a huge mainstream university. And it's, you know, it's mainstream academia. And I got admitted into the painting department. So I got there and I was like, all right, I got to paint now. And so I did. That's what I was doing for the first semester, as I was painting. And then I started really missing and craving this other part of my practice, which is just as important to me. But I had this moment where I was like, oh man, I'm like, I can't just sit down and make a pair of moccasins, because if I just start making a pair of mucks in this space, I'm going to have to conceptually justify them. And, you know, talk to folks and defend their legitimacy in this space and within my practice. And that was such a turnoff for me. I know why it's important. I didn't want to have to fight that academic fight to justify it. At that moment, I was just like, oh, I just can't. And so I started, but I knew that I needed it. I know that part of my practice and my making and my creation is just as important as my painting. And when I'm not doing one, I'm craving it, so like if I'm just focusing on one, I'm craving the other, and vice versa. And so I started experimenting and figuring out, I was like, all right, I got to figure out how to make these things all happen at once, at the same time. And so I played a lot and I experimented a lot with how to combine the practices, how to combine painting and beadwork and quill work predominantly, but other aspects too of sewing and making regalia and things of the sort. And yeah, that's really like that problem solving from that moment of being in this, academic studio space and figuring out how to bring my cultural art making into that space and make it relevant to me and to in a way that felt good in that space, is really where it came from. And then it eventually it kept morphing because so you mentioned, sometimes I use quill work and beadwork on my painting surfaces. So it'll be, mixed media works that incorporate all the mediums. And then sometimes they're straight paintings that mimic both porcupine quill work and lane stitch beadwork. And that happened because while I was in grad school and doing porcupine quill work on paintings, I learned that porcupine quill work does not fit an academic calendar very well. It's a really laborious, long process, and there's deadlines, and I did one really big monumental piece. I could maybe show it to you guys later, and it took months, and I was like, I got to figure out how to bring all these things with me, all the conversations that are embedded in quill work, embedded in beadwork, the teachings that are embedded in that, the value systems, all of that. Like I need all of that in my practice, and yet I need it faster. Is a contradiction in and of itself. And so that, opened up a whole lot of exploration, like conceptual exploration for me within my practice. But that's why I started mimicking it in paint, was because I needed it. I needed everything that was embedded in that, and I needed it to happen faster, which is just such a values clash. But it opened up a really, rich conceptual place for me to explore within my practice.
Absolutely. That's amazing story and information. I'm really, I think, yeah, the idea of bringing when you said bringing all of those things with you, yeah, that really resonates with me. And I think the other thing that's kind of, yeah, maybe funny is that when we look at those works that where you've painted you're representing the quill work or the lane stitching, they don't look fast at all.
They're just faster.
Yeah, not necessarily fast.
Yeah, no, they're not fast whatsoever.
Yeah. I think that when I haven't had the opportunity to see those works in person, but when I've seen them, documentation of them, the other thing that I really love about it is the way that you can play with scale, right? And that the quill work is so detailed and such fine, small work, right? Which I think has a particular way of viewing, a particular relationship to the maker and the viewer. And then in these paintings, I just get this sense of getting to be kind of enveloped by the quill work or the lane stitching, and just like being kind of getting to be surrounded by it visually as opposed to surrounded by it when you're like physically wearing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such an interesting, I think, visual experience that you've created in that way.
Thank you. Yeah, that was important to me. So that's the, you know, there's a few different reasons, and a few different, I guess, sources of motivation. So a lot of my paintings are really large, and then the utilization of mimicking quill work and beadwork in paint um, allows me to scale up in a way that if I attempted to make a quilled piece at that size, I wouldn't see anybody for years. But it still takes a really long time. The largest piece that I've made in that style so far is the last big piece that I made, and it's 7 feet by 10 feet. But it took me 6 months to make it. And the last 3 months I was working like 75-hour work weeks. So it's still extremely laborious, but if I tried to quill a piece or even if I mean, I could, you know, beat a piece in theory at that size too, but it would also take a long time. But the point of scaling up like that has a few different reasons. One of them is because historically Indigenous artists have just have not been valued, you know, and our contributions to the artistic history of this land base has not been valued in the way that is truly reflective of those contributions and of the influences that our work has had on the trajectory of art in these spaces. And so by scaling up and putting large scale paintings on museum and gallery walls next to artists that have been influenced by Indigenous art but get all the credit is a strategic move. There's a reason I want them large, and I want them on museum and gallery spaces that people have to confront and acknowledge and see and honor the work of Indigenous artists. And you know, for practices such as beadwork and quill work, historically, that's honoring the work of Native women, and all that Native women have contributed to our artistic histories. And it's important, and it's not seen. And so making it, like, being able to scale it, you know, using paint to scale up those that history, and then kind of like forcing its presence on the museum walls is it's a strategic move. But I also, you know, I love to paint. So it also just marries all of those practices for me and fulfills me in a way that's, I guess, truest to myself as well. I'm very much influenced by and have a strong affinity with the trajectory of easel painting as well. You know, so and the areas of that practice that speak to me the most have been abstraction and stripe and color field painting eras. And the reason for those, you know, that I've learned after really studying and thinking through that is because those are the aesthetics that are most married to Lakota aesthetics as well. They're the most related. And so for me, it's all, you know, it's all connected to a particular affinity for an aesthetic, cultural aesthetic that I grew up around. And so by doing paintings that also incorporate either very directly the mediums or the histories and value systems that are embedded in the mediums of our cultural artistic practices, it kind of checks all the boxes for me and allows me to kind of create works that are most honest and true to myself. So, you know, I'm Sichangu Lakota. I'm raised predominantly by my mom, who's Lakota. My dad is German and Welsh, And as I spoke to earlier, I grew up in the city. I grew up in Madison, but I grew up going back and forth to the reservation, and I grew up really nurtured predominantly by the Native community in Madison. But I also had a very, like mainstream American youth experience as well. I grew up going to public schools and being immersed in skate and snowboard and hip hop youth culture and all of that. And so the combination of the trajectories of the combination of artistic practices that pull from various artistic histories and expressions from various backgrounds reflects my own kind of amalgamation of life experiences.
Absolutely, that's such a so many rich influences and histories to get to experience, and I think it's really nice to hear all of those different influences as acknowledged, and that they contribute to the richness of our experiences. I think that sometimes, especially with the influence of Indigenous art, right? Like people don't always, I'm trying to say here, can't, yeah, just the way you've spoken about those influences really, I think, like your painting, right, really uplifts and gives so much credit to all of those artistic traditions that are, people have been working on and carrying, so that we could, continue to be artists and continue to innovate and express ourselves and grow these art practices. A couple of the things you mentioned, one thing that I'm really thinking about is the use of color in regalia, and I'm thinking about being at powwows and seeing either beadwork or ribbon work and all of these colors floating and dancing in the movement of the dancers, and the color field paintings, the way that they use color and create the kind of blending and movement and beauty, and the way that your work is really continuing to express the importance of color and the use of color in your work.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'd like to share about that is that when I was in grad school and I got to this place where I was like, all right, now I have to, study art from this perspective. I spent all those years in tribal college and, in spaces where we're teaching from Indigenous perspectives. And then got to grad school and I had to play major catch up for learning art as it's taught from a Western European and European American perspective. And so I was pretty behind on what's taught within those curriculums. And so I was, immersing myself in study of, various and abstraction from the perspective of easel painting. And what I guess, I think is important to emphasize that you touched on is that one, I learned through my various experiences in mainstream education systems and then cultural education systems is that our histories are taught as disparate stories. And it's just the farthest thing from the truth. You can't unravel European and American history from Native history and African American history and et cetera. They're inseparable. And the same goes for the arts. They're taught as different classes. They're put in different galleries. They're, you know, separate histories are taught. You know, there's art history with the capital A, and then there's Native American art history and African American art history, and they're in different spaces, different classes. They're not, you know, it's completely categorized, and it's just it's not representative of the truth. When I was studying those painters that I was talking about, what I learned is that a lot of the folks that I was most attracted to were actively collecting Indigenous art, looking at, living around Native communities, you know, looking at and being influenced by the work of Native artists because of its power and its strength and its beauty and its expertise and its spirit, you know. And I think a lot of what those artists were looking at and acknowledging, we see, you know, when we go to powwows, or when we, you know, are looking at historic collections, or even just the collections within our families, we know that, we feel it, we see it. And those non-Native folks were looking because they see it too, and it inspired their work, you know. And so but in history books, the way that it's taught in classes and curriculums, it's always like a side note, you know. Oh, they were actively collecting, they had this, you know, giant collection in their house, they were looking at this and that, but the names of the artists that they're looking at are never acknowledged. Seldom is a tribe acknowledged. And so it's always this side note, and generally the white dude gets all the credit, and the Native women artists who he was, you know, looking at are side notes. But that you can see the intersections between what was produced in their work and what was being actively produced in Native communities. And so it's my, you know, my work is really meant to create opportunities for conversations to hopefully move towards a space where we're telling more honest art histories, where we're speaking to the intersectionality, where we're speaking to those cross influences. Native arts wouldn't look the way they do today if we did not have trade relationships with non-Native people. And abstraction would not look the way it did today had those folks not been looking at Indigenous art and thinking about those art forms. It's just that, you know, we've not been, our art forms have not been given, you know, the proper credit and due value for those contributions. There was another thing I wanted to say, and it left my mind. Maybe it'll come back, but you had, maybe it'll come back. We can move on.
Sure. I was really interested when I learned quill work. I learned how to do the zigzag stitch, and then how to do straight stitch. So putting the quills onto hide or foundation. And I was really struck with the straight stitch, that I was like, this is like a lane stitch. And then I started looking at some of the examples of the way that artists had used straight stitch with quill work and the way that they then used lane stitching with their beadwork. And then the other connection I made between those two was like making I can't remember the name of it, but folding the quill into little triangles, right? So you get the kind of
the sawtooth,
the sawtooth, and then it makes this like little wave, which you then see with the like rickrack of the sewing applique. So
think about ribbon work, southern communities of the zigzag ribbon work in like Oklahoma area.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're one-to-one translations. It's amazing. I remembered what I was going to say, so I'm going to backtrack for a minute and then I'll come back to this. Um, you talked about color, and so one of the things that I wanted to share was that, you know, as I was studying color field painting and looking at the way that, you know, people walk into museums and galleries, and you know, sometimes folks will walk up and, you know, see a giant color field painting and be like, it's a big block of red, why do I care about this, and walk away. But when you make a decision to sit and engage with works, color field and stripe painting works, there are, like, if you look at a Mark Rothko painting, there's variations, you know, that those paintings are layered, and so there's variations in hue and depth of a particular color, highlights and lowlights, and mid-ground, and, you know, this variety of, like, if it was all red, you know, there's a rich variety of reds. And so when you stand in front of that work and really engage with it, your eyes dance within that space, which is what makes it so fulfilling. It's active, you know, and you get to both simultaneously rest within that space and be completely engaged within that space. And so it's just this beautiful, unique experience. And for me, the tie between that and our works was that I feel the exact same way when I look at a field of beadwork or a field of quill work. And it's because the same things are happening. Like, if you looked at, you know, a woman's buckskin dress that's got a fully beaded yoke, if you look at those areas where, like, let's say it's a whole area of turquoise beads, you know, and there, you know, there's, you know, the symbolism that's beaded in, but then there's, you know, swaths and spaces of a single color, but you get all this variety in that color because of the highlights and lowlights that happen from the individual bead, you know. And so you get shadow and you get highlights around the spaces of the beads, but also from the stacking of the beads, and then in lane work, you know, also from the rhythm that happens in the rows. And so you look at that entire, you know, like, swath of just turquoise, and it's just immensely beautiful. And it does the same thing. You are able to both rest in that space and stay, like, you want to stay in that space, but it also keeps you active and engaged because you've got all this activity. So for me, that was the like, the connection between the two of what each was trying, you know, of what each was utilizing and achieving in the work. And it fills you. It has a way of feeling, it's, for me, it's medicinal. Like, there's reasons why as human beings we keep coming back to artistic production and creation, and that feeling that you feel when you're looking at work that is just awe-striking, that's a medicinal quality. You know, you get filled up by that in a way that is really unique to other things in life, you know. And so I think we keep coming back to that, and it's healing, you know. And so that was an intersection between those practices that has been really important to me, and that's something that guides my work today. And then when you were talking about the one-to-one translation from practices of quill work to the practices of beadwork and other practices, other materials, it totally is. And once you realize that, it's just the coolest moment, because you know, our ancestors and our folks have been and continue to be such a wildly innovative people. And you know, people think about beads now as, you know, as you say beadwork and you think about Native folks, and beads are a trade item. They were made elsewhere, but the the women that took those beads, those original beads, and were like, oh my God, I can only imagine how exciting it must have been, because quill work is amazing and I love it and it's beautiful and I love to do it, but it is hard, like for all the reasons we talked about before, all of the harvesting and that, if you're doing dyeing, you have to, harvest plants, and then have mordants and all of this, there's so much prep, and then cleaning and sorting and getting the hair out and all, there's so much that happens before you're actually stitching and tacking down the work, right? And then the work itself takes a super long time, and it's not the most resilient material. So all of a sudden you get these glass beads introduced, and they are a perfect, like they fit perfectly into these already established practices. They fit perfectly into practices that already been upheld for all of this time, right? It's like it's taking kind of like pixels, and it was a supernatural translation, from this practice to that practice. It works perfectly, and it's really resilient, very strong, and all these colors, and so I can just imagine like how excited the women must have been, and to have this new material to play with. And you can see it when you visit collections. You get like the piece that we get exposed to the artwork that's in historic collections through like books and print and online media, but we don't get to see all the work that's in collections. And when you get to actually go into a collection, so everybody that's here, just so you know, collections are available for you to visit, and you should make an effort, if you haven't yet, to find a historic collection near you and call them and tell them you want to visit, because it's available, but you get to see the pieces that don't make it into catalogs. And oftentimes those are the pieces that you can tell somebody was just super excited and was like, I'm going to try this, and it's these total like anomalies that are just so creative and fun. And you can tell those artists were, taking what they knew and had these new materials or new ideas, and were just running with it. And so I love when we can see those connections of like, this was what was the established practice, here's the introduction of a new material, and this is what our folks created with it, and now that's traditional, and so you can see that in so many, wool and cotton calico fabrics and beads and brass and German silver sequins and tin cones and cotton fabrics and satin fabrics and all of this, like all of these things that now like are part of our artistic practices. It's amazing. I love that quality about the history of our artwork.
Absolutely. I had the opportunity to teach a class at a traditional arts class here at in Toronto at OCAD, and I got my students. We did some quill dyeing, and I gave them a bunch of colors, and I just like let them. I outlined the process, and some people had some experience, so I kind of let them go at it. And they chose bright pink as their like first dye color, and one of the students had had a manicure with very long pointed bright pink nails.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a really again, great expression of different cultural influences coming together through color, through our expression of, what we wear on our bodies. Just that kind of that continuing excitement of different materials and ways to express ourselves.
Yeah. And that's just, our culture cultures in general, and ours included, have always expressed a contemporary environment, our current environment. Where our stories, just because they've been told from the outside in, aren't reflective of that in mainstream media and mainstream academia. We're historicized. But what I was talking about in collections, some of my favorite moments are when you like see a pair of like moccasins that you documented in a catalog. And then you get to lift up the tongue. If you're in a collection and you can hold it and look at all the different parts, you lift up the tongue and you see those are hot pink quills, like, but they've been faded on the rest of it and you couldn't see it except for this part that's been protected by the fold over. And it's just so exciting to be like, yes, hot pink quills in the 1800s, you know, and like, and to think about that full color that was happening and it still is happening, yet, you know, our folks have been, you know, in mainstream media and film and history and all that have been told as historic relics that are all in sepia tone and everything's, you know, muted colors, and it's just not true. And it's just I love seeing those moments, you know, or you get to see somebody who beaded a pair of moccasins in the style of Mary Jane's, or, you know, just it's just our people have always figured out ways to take the newest and most, you know, newest material and incorporated it into our established practices and make it our own. And it's just, it's a beautiful continuum.
Absolutely. Okay, a beautiful continuum. We've got a couple minutes left, so I just thought I'd give our wonderful audience here a chance to see if anybody wants to ask any questions. You could write it in the chat or pop on screen or audio if you want to ask verbally.
I see a couple friends too. Hi, Juanicia and Kiana.
Yeah, people have been pretty quiet on the questions. I think people are really taking everything in and thinking about it. When you were talking about pink and these different bright colors, I had a friend show me a picture of corn that they were growing, and this corn was a beautiful bright red pink with like white went from white into a kind of pinkish red color. And I looked at that, and again I thought of the these colors in our quill work and how much we can also be I guess like in some ways the lack of color that's also taken out of our food, right, as things go into monoculture and be genetically modified. So yeah, making those color connections to the plants and our food sources.
Right on.
Got some questions. Julie Blair wants to thank you. And Kalisha asks, how would you describe your art's subject matter?
You know, it varies throughout the years, but I think that there's a particular thread that I've spoken to here today. So I really make an effort to emphasize in my works centralizing Native folks, Native people, and Native arts within our national artistic dialogue. So I create abstract works, but I create abstract works that pull from the history of Lakota abstraction and the history of easel painting abstraction as well, and combine those things. And I speak to those intersections. I speak to the way that our histories have been mistold or you know, strategically not told, the way that Native folks have been underrepresented and undervalued, and I guess a lot of my work pushes back against hierarchies that have been created within our society, and the way that those very naturally are reflected within the arts, within the practice of art making. You know, the arts are a reflection of our societies at large. So all of the societal hierarchies and dysfunction that's been created through colonialism is reflected in the arts. And so a lot of my work is meant to push back against those hierarchies that have placed certain art by certain people at the top of the hierarchical ladder, and then to oppress art and mediums of other folks below that. And so my work is really meant to critique and question and push back against the way that our art histories are told, but also to centralize Native people, Native contributions, the realities of contemporary Native people, and our histories within mainstream conversations. And so some works are really have a very specific narrative. Some works are like, for example, like pushing back against appropriation of Native design and aesthetics in fashion industry, or speak to the resiliency of Native artistic creation throughout time. Some of them are really specific narratives, but they all are kind of under this overarching umbrella of centralizing Native art and people, and creating opportunities for folks to have to second think the way that those histories have been fed to them, and hopefully start encouraging folks to think about telling our artistic histories and our histories on this land base in a more honest and inclusive way. And at the same time, I really want my work to carry those same kind of medicinal qualities that the work of our ancestors does. So I want folks to be able to walk up to works, to be filled by those works, to feel nurtured by those works, so that we are better prepared to have the harder conversations that are embedded within them. It's a good question.
Absolutely. I just want to say a really, really big Wata Anishik, big thank you for spending this time with us today and sharing all of your knowledge and your stories with us. It's been incredibly insightful and fulfilling for me. Yeah, reading everybody comments, it sounds like it has been too for the audience. So just a really big, heartfelt thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. And for those of you that came on, thanks for spending time with us today. Yeah. I see my friend Leah just made it too. Or Crystal just made it. And we're done now, Crystal, but it was recorded.
Yeah, we recorded this, so we're going to have all 3 of these conversations available through I believe it'll be through the OISE website. If you registered, we'll send you a link to it and put it on social media. Our plan is to have them available until the end of December, so you can reconnect with this conversation or some of the others.
Right on. Thanks for the invite, Vanessa. It's lovely to be able to just talk quills. It's a unique opportunity. I haven't had anybody else ask me to do that, so thank you.
Great. So glad.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.